You cannot have a better DA than her. She's doing a fantastic job. She's a great role model. She's a great mother and a wife. So please, Lisa, can you please come up here?
Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be Martha's first choice of the bullpen. I'm happy to be here. I think are we going to have is this come off? I think we have one mic today. All right, so I'll put that down. So it's good to be back. Thank you for having me. The nicest thing, Martha, that you can ever say about me is that I'm a good mother. So thank you for saying that. I try very hard and actually was available today because my children are on vacation this week. So my calendar was light and I was honored to be asked by Martha and Maggie to come and help moderate today. So I will take this opportunity, if you three gentlemen are ready, to introduce our distinguished panel, and you guys can come up and have a seat. We have H. Spees, who is the Senior Vice President of the Leadership Foundation, Jeremy Pearce, who is a businessman and political activist, and Steve Brandau, who is one of our Fresno City Councilmen. So gentlemen, please have a seat. So today we are going to have not a debate, but simply a format for people to, we obviously know we have some political players up here. We're not here to advocate for a campaign or one position one way or the other, but we're just really here to share some information. I think we can all agree that we are in some crazy political times nationally and quite frankly, sometimes on the state level too. So we have these three gentlemen who are going to share their information and knowledge with us. And I will be sort of directing traffic up here if we could. So I think one of the most important things that we want to talk about, and in light of everything that's going on here nationally, is to talk really just about the basics of what a caucus is and to provide that information as we begin the discussion today. So I don't know who wants to volunteer to begin.
Cool.
Okay.
So thank you, Lisa. Thank you all for being here and being interested in American democratic process. And it is convoluted. We are going to talk about some issues today that are mysterious. I mean, and so let's begin with caucus. So everybody knows that that the parties need to formally select their nominees prior to the general election in November. And how they do that varies from state to state. So generally, delegates are awarded at the state level through one of two ways of voting, either a caucus or a primary. And I won't talk all about caucuses. I'll just pass it down. But generally, those are two very different ways. Primaries are run by the state, and caucuses are run by the party in the state. So with that, I'll pass it down to my brother Jeremy.
Yeah, in the caucus process, what generally happens is the neighborhood meetings in each precinct in the state. And you get together in little preference groups, they call them. So I'm for Marco Rubio, I'm for Ted Cruz, I'm for Donald Trump. And then for 30 minutes, you discuss your candidate with your neighbors. And these meetings take place in schools or churches, libraries, homes. And then after the first 30 minutes, you take a vote. Any candidate that doesn't meet a 15% threshold, they're out, and now you get to lobby those people for your candidate. Try to bring them into your preference group. That's another 30 minutes, and then there's another vote taken at that point. So it's a lot of talking to your neighbors and trying to convince them rather than just going in and voting for a candidate.
In my view of government, I've always felt that our founders intended the power to be closest to the people rather than a party system or an apparatus system. So I've always looked at the caucus system very interested in how they do it. And in California, though, we have a primary system. It's much different and run, as H mentioned earlier, from the state party apparatus. Tells you how it's going to be run. There's another definition of caucus that I apply to, and Martha was very clear to me that that this is a nonpartisan luncheon, but I'm a Republican. And inside the Republican Party, I belong to a caucus. It's the Tea Party California caucus. I'm a Tea Party guy, so I'm out here on the right side. And inside, yeah, that's why you put me here. Inside of the party, you can have a caucus, which really means a subgroup of the party. And you could come together, you could have a Christian caucus, you could have a Christian businesswomen's caucus. And then when you meet in Sacramento or wherever the state convention would be, you'd pull all the people from across the state with that one core theme into a room and begin to implement a game plan on how to affect the whole bigger party. And so I've seen a caucus work on that local level as well, so it's been very interesting.
We're in a time, gentlemen, I think in my 46 years, I know that I have never seen with regard to our presidential election. And we have R's against D's and red against blue. But we also have a time now where you see inter-party conflict like I think I have never seen in my life. And we see both parties on the R&D side cannibalizing each other. And the conventions, the national conventions that oftentimes so many of us rely upon to determine the leadership of the party and the direction of the party and the support of the candidate, it is going to be a very interesting time, I think, this year as we come upon the election. So if we could, let's have a little discussion about what a contested convention is.
In most election years, one presidential candidate comes up with enough delegates during the primary process to walk into the convention and be the candidate. When that doesn't happen, and by the way, this year in the Republican convention, that will take 1,237 votes. And last I checked, Mr. Trump, who was the front runner, had, I believe, 752 votes. And if he gets 52% of the remaining votes, then he'll be the uncontested nominee. But a lot can happen between here and there. And when that, and this idea of a contested election or convention or a brokered election, convention, brokered, based on my study, contested and brokered are basically the same thing. Brokered is a little more sinister because it gives the sense of folks in the back room making decisions about how the selection process will go. But when that takes place, for instance, in 1860, when the Republican Party was born, a very similar thing happened. Abraham Lincoln won that year because he ran for second. He basically was very wise and very shrewd and knew that it was going to be a contested convention. He didn't demonize any of his opponents, and he built relationships with those various delegations, asking them that if the opportunity came up, would they choose him second. That's how he won that election.
In my lifetime, the convention's been pretty much just an infomercial for the party, for the candidate, and so forth. And but to have actual business on that level, there's been, Steve and I were talking about little things that have happened in recent years, but to have the nominee in doubt going into Cleveland in July and having the nominee in doubt, that's big stuff that we haven't seen in American politics in a long time.
I would like to simplify it really quickly, and then we can continue discussing. This is a contested convention, which is what the question was about. A contested convention, there's no clear-cut winner. Then rules begin to take place that the convention sets up. For instance, right now, one of the rules is that the only eventual nominee has got to have won 8 states on their own to become the nominee. Now that rule can be changed leading up to the day of that convention. But if nobody has the number of delegates required, it goes to a contested convention where, I'm going to give you an example. The other delegates that had dropped out of the race, they can release their delegates to vote for somebody new. That happened in the case of Ronald Reagan and Gerald Ford, I believe. Okay, Ronald Reagan came in second place, could have thrown a contested convention and demanded an opportunity to become first place. Instead, he stepped back and he talked to the party bosses. He stepped back, gave the speech of his life, and 4 years later became our president. But he stepped back in order to let Gerald Ford take that leadership spot because Gerald Ford hadn't had the proper number of delegates. That's a contested convention. A brokered convention and I think we might go into this a little bit more in detail. A brokered convention is when somebody has the proper number of delegates and the party doesn't want that candidate anyway. So then they step in. This is what people are afraid of in the Republican Party, which I belong to, that we don't want to see happen, where somebody in a cigar smoke-filled room makes the choice for the people. So you have these two different types of conventions, one brokered, one contested. Contested still, when nobody has the right number of delegates, it goes into a whole different set of rules, and you begin the process over and over again. How many time it takes to get 1,237 delegates? So.
If we could just digress a little bit and talk a little bit about how each candidate obtains their votes and their delegate votes. I think that would be very informative because each state is in fact different.
In the different states are so varied, it's hard to follow the way the different states apply their delegates to different candidates. Now, I've just found out in the last couple of days, when Louisiana voted on the Republican side of the aisle, Donald Trump was the winner. But since that time, Ted Cruz's team has gone behind in the state party practices and rules and pulled delegates away from Trump and brought them onto the Cruz team. You wouldn't think that could happen. So right now, we're way past Louisiana. That was weeks ago. Donald Trump is declared the winner of Louisiana, but in reality, Ted Cruz has more delegates from Louisiana at this point. So it's very interesting. It's very convoluted to follow it all. And so I think it's fascinating. I myself think we're headed to a contested convention. I don't think anybody's going to have the 1,237 votes. So that will be very fascinating once we get to the convention floor to see those delegates who were previously assigned to a certain candidate to see how they shift around. I'm going to be watching with eyes wide open.
But yeah, there's going to be a lot of talk, trade, so forth, because not only will you not have a presidential nominee, you won't have a vice presidential either. Because if the party at the convention is picking the presidential candidate, they will also pick the vice presidential candidate. So behind the scenes, there are people lobbying for that and trying to get in position for that.
Let me just give you an idea of some of the complications. How many delegates does each state get, and how are those delegates assigned to candidates? Well, the number of delegates depends on two things. One is population and loyalty to the party. Those are two basic determinants. Now, don't you just love that? I mean, this is not objective stuff. For Republicans, each state receives 3 delegates for each congressional district. That's a population component. And then 5 delegates for each senator. There are also 3 automatic party delegates and bonuses based on whether, Tom, you pay the guy a bonus. He hits so many home runs, he's got to get a bonus this time. Bonuses based on whether the state voted for the Republican nominee in a previous presidential election, or has a Republican governor, Republican senators, or Republican-controlled state legislative chambers. That's the partisan loyalty component. So, I mean, it gets more complicated from there, and wow, it's America.
I think that this chaos causes people to become indifferent to the election process. I can't speak for anybody but myself, but it is so frustrating to me as an American citizen and now as an elected official to think that really it is this complicated, and that really whether we agree with or disagree with the issues and the candidates, and quite honestly, I think everybody, whether you're whatever side of the aisle you're on, everyone has to be disgusted with this presidential election that has sunk into the position where we have naked photographs of a potential first lady floating around the internet. It's just despicable on so many levels. What is your take on that level of sort of dirty politics, and not only in the campaigns, but also in the whole process of obtaining these delegate votes?
People are frustrated for a lot of different reasons. They're frustrated at the tone. They're frustrated at the dirty tricks. They're frustrated with the thought of somebody going in with enough and being denied that. I've had people tell me, I'm not for Donald Trump, but if they take that from him, then that's going to look really bad. And so that's the type of thing that people are concerned about, is what's the fairness here? Because it's people don't understand the process. I mean, we've been studying this, so we're up to speed. I got a degree in political science, and you still have to go brush up now exactly how does this work? And so when you don't have it clear to the people, it makes them suspicious also of what exactly is going on. How does this work?
So I think I see a lot of agitation, Lisa, in both parties, and that agitation is actually driving interest and not apathy. So I think apathy has happened over the course of time when you have parties that are not seeking to engage the people and what the people care to be talking about. Now, for me, on both sides of the aisle, and you know what, I watched a Bernie Sanders a speech a couple weeks ago after he won one of the states, and I saw hundreds of thousands of passionate people. So I actually think all of this rough and tumble thing that we call politics is finally engaging the American people. Now, I don't know what the outcomes are. I don't know if it's a good engagement or a bad engagement.
But you know what? For all of the negativity and for all of the imperfection, there is no better system. And back to the 1860 election with Abraham Lincoln, right about that time, abolition was such a hot issue that there was a senator who had proposed an abolitionist law in the Senate. And another senator came in with a metal-tipped cane and beat him almost to death on the floor of the Senate. I mean, this, if you want to see what rough and tumble is, it isn't generated just by Facebook and by television. You go back to some of the flyers and some of the newspaper articles in the 1860s, and it makes us blush in this day and age. So, you know, I think that it isn't a perfect process, but it's the best process in the world.
As H illustrated, people, this is part of our history, right? In the founding of our nation, we had two men go to a duel together. We haven't quite seen that yet in modern American politics, right? So Hamilton and Burr. So the truth is, from the founding of this country, we like to look at our founding fathers and put them on a painting, and it's all real pasty, and we like to pretend that everything they did was fantastic. That is so far from the truth. That's not even funny. Most of the time, those decisions took so long in Philadelphia and in Washington because they could not stand to be in the same room with each other, okay? And so we get very glossy about our nation's history. A lot of it's very inaccurate, okay? And so I don't see, now, Lisa, you mentioned a naked woman or the naked wife of a potential candidate. Well, you know, your wife should not be taking naked pictures, right? Okay. So politics is a blood sport. I know I might be these two guys are in major races right now. I don't have anybody opposing me. So I can probably go a little further out on the edge. I can go a little further out on the edge than they can, but politics is a blood sport, and it is not for the faint of heart. H, you touched on that. It's not for the faint of heart. And if you are a Christian, which I know both of these gentlemen are, as myself as well, and the folks in this room, you play by the rules. You play as hard as you can by the rules, and you don't cheat, and you don't cross that line. Unfortunately, not everybody follows that same set of principles. But even within the rules that I'm talking about, you have to play hard, or you're going to be a walking mat because your opponents will not play. Your opponents probably won't play by those rules.
Gentlemen, if we could move on to discussing the issue which we're facing now in the presidential campaign, the difference between dropping out and suspending campaigns. And I'd like to discuss a little bit about what happens to the delegates once a candidate does either drop out or suspend their campaign.
That while candidates are frequently referred to as dropping out, you notice that they're using the more technical language, and there's a reason for that, because candidates themselves usually use the phrase suspending my campaign. That means they stop actively campaigning, they get rid of their staffs, they stop running ads and giving speeches, but their campaigns don't legally end. So they keep the delegates that they've acquired. And they can take those to the convention and they can distribute those at will. So in 1974, as Steve mentioned, Ronald Reagan took that was a contested convention, and changed that by affirming Gerald Ford. By the way, the last contested convention where the candidate actually won was Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932. So it's very, very rare. And so delegates can go, and then their names remain on the ballot in the states that they haven't voted yet if they keep their campaign in suspension, and they can actually acquire more delegates, which they wouldn't do if they had dropped out.
Each state has different rules for the delegates. Some, you are bound to your candidate just through the first ballot. Most of them are released after that. Some states, it's the second or third ballot before the delegates are released to go to another candidate. And some states, it's not until the candidate who you're pledged to formally releases them. And so each state, it's a different process.
You watch a guy like Chris Christie, who was just previously emaciated by Donald Trump, turn around and stand up behind him a couple of days later and support him. You think, what in the heck is going on? And really, and then also Chris Christie holds on to the delegates that he has. In my thought process, it's a very human thing. He's holding them on because they represent power at that point. So he can still wheel and deal, although he practically could not stand the man a week ago. Now he can wheel and deal with the delegates that he possesses and whatever other political stature that he possesses. So he can make a deal to be, and it could be anything from, I would like to be considered to your vice president. I would like to be the ambassador to Cuba. I like to be the attorney general. Ben Carson could be surgeon general. You're holding your delegates because they represent power. You can either exercise them in a deal under the table, or you can exercise them at the convention. So to me, it's all very fascinating. Before I turn the microphone back over, I want to say it's been a blessing to be with you this afternoon. And whatever your line of work, and some of you might be grandparents, might be retired, you have grandkids, you have children out there. If they're Christian people, tell them that they have to be aggressive Christians in the workplace. It's one of the only places where we really face really tough decisions, and it's very valuable to carry your Christian witness. I pray, look, I've made mistakes on Fresno City Council. I've taken crappy votes. I've done things I wish if I would have known that, I would have voted different. But I still pray over every vote, and I pray every day to do a good job to represent the citizens of Fresno. So thank you for having us this afternoon.
Yeah. And I want to thank Martha for inviting me. I'm a newbie, and to be up here with men like this is a real honor. And thank you for letting me be a part of this today.
Well, thank you, Martha, and thank you all of you for caring about our country, for caring about our city. I'd like to just touch on something that Lisa said, and that is that all of these, the quirkiness, the complexity, and sometimes the shenanigans and the dirty tricks that go on as a part of American democratic process can be discouraging. And they can be discouraging to a generation of young people. However, one of the things that is most exciting to me is that there is a generation of young ones, and I'm talking about 20s, 30s, and 40s in our town, who care about this city, who are passionate about this city, and believe, and many of them are strong Christ followers. And they believe that Fresno can be a great city. And that encourages me. It's one of the main reasons that I'm doing what I'm doing.